In my last few months of seminary, with graduation in sight, I realized that I was just one credit short. I had planned to take a day-long program on environmental justice for that one credit, but then I was invited to come spend a week with a congregation that was considering calling me as minister. Yes, that was the congregation.
Sorry about that.
So instead, I proposed to one of my advisors that I do an independent study to complete my graduation requirements. I researched and wrote a paper titled Bending Toward Justice, which, as I summarized in the introduction, documents and describes, if incompletely and inevitably so, the work toward justice of Unitarians, Universalists, and Unitarian Universalists in terms of history, theology, and resources. My goal is to provide at least a reasonably thorough overview of the past, present, and future dimensions of justice making in order to better understand, motivate, and organize that work. In the history part of the paper, I listed events that illustrated how our justice efforts have ebbed and flowed throughout the centuries, including both successes and failures. The first date was 1784, when white Universalist physician Benjamin Rush in Philadelphia called for the abolition of slavery. On the basis of his Universalist beliefs, he also argued for better treatment for prisoners and for the elimination of the death penalty in the 1780s. I continued through the rest of the 18th century and into the 19th. The American Unitarian Association supported a ministry to Boston's urban poor. William Ellery Channing's church refused to allow a memorial service for Charles Follen, who brought the Christmas tree to America, given Follen's radical abolitionism. Dorothea Dix campaigned for better facilities for the treatment of mental illness. Senator John C. Calhoun, a Unitarian, pushed for the Fugitive Slave Act, and President Millard Fillmore, also a Unitarian, signed it. 4 of the Secret Six who financed John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry were Unitarians. Universalist Olympia Brown was ordained, the first woman fully, if reluctantly, recognized by any denomination. In Norfolk, Joseph Jerden was ordained, the first African-American Universalist minister. George Pullman, wealthy industrialist, Universalist, and brother of 2 Universalist ministers, called in federal troops to break a strike by his exploited workers. The 20th century, of course, had even more dates. Unitarians amongst the founding members of the NAACP, the first African-American Unitarian minister, the Universalist work with Jane Addams and their Declaration of Social Principles, the American Unitarian Association removing their first African-American minister from fellowship and then being sued by the ACLU, the Unitarian Service Committee and the mission of the Sharps to rescue European Jews and anti-Nazi political leaders, the desegregation of the First Unitarian Society of Chicago, Howard Thurman and then Dr. King as Ware lecturers at General Assembly, the first UU minister of Japanese ancestry, the so-called Black empowerment controversy and the resulting walkout at General Assembly, the support of the United Farm Workers lettuce boycott and the publication of the Pentagon Papers, the revision of Article 2 to use gender-neutral language, the Partner Church program with Unitarian churches in Transylvania, the first female president of any theological school, the infamous Thomas Jefferson Ball, the resolution calling on the UUA to become an anti-racist, anti-oppressive, multicultural religious community. And at the beginning of the 21st century, the elections of the first African-American UUA president and then the first Latino UUA president. We've since elected, at long last, our first female UUA president too. This is, of course, merely scratching the surface. In all, my paper included a dozen pages on our steps forward and sometimes backward when it comes to UU justice work, with a history at least as old as this nation of trying and failing and trying again to build the beloved community, the kingdom of heaven here on earth. This is our legacy as UUs, and this is our vision here at the UUFP, such as is expressed in the 7th point of our congregational covenant adopted last December. We covenant to build racial, social, and environmental justice in the beloved community. That's what we're talking about this morning, but for now, let's sing. Every Unitarian Universalist congregation, in my experience, has a justice program. The details vary, of course, because each congregation decides for itself what makes sense for it to do. And while a lot of it is driven by the members' own interests and concerns, it is based on and supported by our UU theology. As UU theologian James Luther Adams explained in the 1940s, in the third of what became known as his 5 smooth stones of liberal religion, we are morally obliged to contribute to communities of justice and compassion. We are called to claim ownership over our own civic lives, requiring the achievement of freedom with respect to material resources as well as with respect to spiritual resources. For the last 40 years, justice has been the only UU value to be named more than twice in our current UUA covenant, in both the 2nd and 6th principles and in the second source. And as I preached on Palm Sunday, justice is one of the 7 foundational values with love at the center in the proposal for a new UUA covenant. Here at the UUFP, our congregation's history includes an extensive list of justice activities from the 1960s to the present. If you don't remember it from your own membership orientation, you can find it on the UUFP website. And as you've heard members of our own Justice Committee share recently, given the substantial number of programs in which we're engaged, while not denying their intersectionality with one another, the committee has reorganized itself into 5 justice teams in order to help provide some focus. Given our hundreds of years of history as UUs, given our theology, given our decades of history as the UUFP, given the openly outrageous acts of injustice that we have witnessed in recent years and that we continue to witness every day, it makes perfect sense that as part of our congregational covenant, we have promised one another to build racial, social, and environmental justice in the beloved community. First, racial justice. This is carrying forward the rich, if often stumbling legacy of UU efforts to secure freedom, civil rights, and equity for all people, to end the disproportionate incarceration of and police violence against African Americans in particular, to restore the rights and liberties of Native Americans, and to ensure that all people of color are treated as fairly as white people, whether by law or by employers or by housing. It's about ending white privilege, not by making life worse for white people, but by making life better and more equitable for people of color. And so we have a racial justice team that is leading our efforts, offering opportunities to educate ourselves, learn from one another, bear witness to right and wrong, and make a difference. Next, social justice. This is really the broad term for any justice work, distinct from the legal justice that is all about punishment and retribution. Social justice, on the other hand, is about restoration. And so we have a resource justice team, which is about helping so many of our fellow citizens get the basic resources of food and shelter that they need. We have a legislative justice team, which is about working to pass fair laws and oppose unfair laws, as well as other political issues such as reproductive rights. And we have a queer justice team, which is leading our participation in this year's Pride events and looking at a renewal of our status as a welcoming congregation so that the UUFP can be a true ally to the queer community. Now, environmental justice is the newest of the three and seems to be the least understood amongst the public. It doesn't mean some government agency fining a polluter and making them clean up their mess. And it's not the same as environmentalism, which is why the team that does both environmental justice and environmental work is called the Earth Justice Team. So here's the definition of environmental justice that is being developed by Virginia Interfaith Power and Light. Environmental justice upholds the moral right to preserve the earth, particularly the interconnectedness between people and nature. Environmental justice affirms that all communities value self-determination and deserve to enjoy fresh air, pure water, and unpolluted soil, the resources to thrive and to live with dignity and peace, not diminished or degraded by religious, cultural, social, and economic injustices that have historically and disproportionately impacted Black, Brown, Indigenous, and low-wealth communities within Virginia and beyond. The environmental justice movement was a response to acts of environmental racism. In 1982, Dolly Burwell, known as the mother of environmental justice, worked with her Baptist church to organize hundreds of mostly women from her Black North Carolina community to block trucks from carrying soil contaminated with PCBs, known carcinogens, to their local landfill. It was their struggle that birthed the national environmental justice movement. Now, Burwell and her church and others did this because even after 4 years of protests and lawsuits, the EPA still approved the dumping of contaminated soil in that Black community. And while the EPA does now have a definition of environmental justice, it seems to be more about spreading the pollution and toxins around, regardless of race, rather than making sure that everybody can enjoy a clean and healthy environment. We certainly know of environmental injustices here in our own community, with the air and water pollution of the coal yards in Newport News, to the industrial development of the former Virginia School for the Deaf and Blind in Hampton. And one of my fellow board members at Virginia Interfaith Power and Light is a resident and organizer in Brown Grove, a historic Black community founded by former slaves just north of Richmond that already suffers the health and economic impacts of 3 industrial facilities placed in their town and is now fighting against a 4th. We covenant to build racial, social, and environmental justice in the beloved community. It's injustice that is keeping us from reaching the beloved community, a commonwealth of love, justice, equity, and peace for all. So long as there's white supremacy, so long as people are going hungry and homeless, so long as there are unfair laws and policies, so long as queer people are demeaned and dehumanized, so long as we think of people's lives and the earth itself as mere commodities to be exploited for profit, then we won't reach the beloved community. We can imagine it. We can imagine what it would be like to live in the beloved community, the kingdom of heaven here on earth, and then we can work for the justice that will get us there. I'm going to ask you some wondering questions now, and I'll give you a little time after each to reflect. Lynn, please put each question on the screen as I read it. Thank you. I wonder what it means to you that the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. I wonder how you have experienced UU or other religious justice work. I wonder what you learned from the story of desegregation at the First Unitarian Society of Chicago. I wonder how you imagine living in the beloved community. As I said earlier, even if we're clearly not there yet, we can still imagine what it would be like to live in the beloved community, the kingdom of heaven here on earth. I'm going to give you a few minutes now to imagine living in the beloved community. And I ask you to come up with a simple, concise description of what you imagine. In a few minutes, Solstice will invite you to share your descriptions in small groups. So keep in mind that your group will have about 5 minutes in total, or maybe 1 minute each to speak. I know this is a challenge for some of you. Lynn, please put the prompt for this activity on the screen. Take a few minutes to imagine living in the beloved community and to come up with a concise 1 minute description to share. We haven't started the sharing yet. One of the injustices that is currently being perpetrated on our nation is the lie that any history other than white history is divisive, that any culture other than straight white male culture is hurtful to children. As a result, the history and contributions of people of color, women, and queer people are being erased from public life. One of the latest assaults on liberty by this bigotry is the banning of Amanda Gorman's inaugural poem, The Hill We Climb, from a school in Florida following the complaint of just one parent. So to conclude our topic today, we're going to listen to the last portion of The Hill We Climb by Amanda Gorman. Lynn, please play the video.
We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be a country that is bruised, but whole, benevolent, but bold, fierce, and free. We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens, but one thing is certain. If we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left. With every breath from our bronze-pounded chests, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the gold-limbed hills of the West. We will rise from the windswept Northeast, where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked South. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover in every nook of our nation, in every corner called our country. Our people, diverse and dutiful, will emerge battered but beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it.
May we be brave enough.